All right, welcome everybody. This is Jack Paisley and the Sports Casual. Welcome back. We're gonna cover the last game of Wildcard Weekend, which was the Los Angeles Rams getting the 27-9 victory over the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm gonna take a second just to soak it in. I called it, everybody. I told you that the Rams were gonna beat the Minnesota Vikings. I didn't think it was going to be this bad, to be fair. But coming into this with just all the outside noise, the drama that's just kind of surrounded California with all these wildfires, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like the New Orleans Saints after Hurricane Katrina years and years ago. It just felt like like the Rams have been in LA for a while now, that like they are LA's team. I know the Chargers are there, but realistically, it's not a Chargers town. It's either people harboring old allegiances to like the Raiders from when they were in Oakland, or it's now a Rams state, or at least city in terms of LA. And it felt like the Rams came out just like raring to go and play for their city. That they came out with just a ton of passion, a ton of fight, and they just beat the shit out of Sam Darnold. I think they had like 6 sacks in the first half, which is the first time that's happened in a long time. And offensively, they came out firing too. Obviously, they came out with that early touchdown to start off the game. Uh, I'm a big believer in Matt Stafford. I think that man is a first ballot Hall of Famer easy. I think if he hadn't been trapped up in Detroit and had been, I think he's basically the hidden gem version of like a Aaron Rodgers. That whenever you got him with Sean McVay, who's a top 3 coach in the NFL, and you give them time to prepare for an opponent in the playoffs that has never really been there, I'm always going to take the Rams. I think that even next week when they're playing, I believe it's the Eagles. Even though the Eagles have a theoretically better roster, I still don't think you can count out the Rams in that matchup just because of their coach quarterback, and then their defense has just been playing lights out all year. It's just a bunch of young guys that are kind of on the come up altogether, kind of like how the Packers offensively were like that. That was the rumor around town like a couple years ago, how all these young guys are going to be making big money one of these days, but for now they're on their rookie deals. That's kind of what the Rams defense feels like to me. And then on the flip side, just a great season kind of just came crashing down around the Minnesota Vikings. Um, Basically right after the Detroit Lions game, they lost that game. It kind of felt like that Lions team sucked the soul out of the Vikings a little bit. It stole all of the confidence that Sam Darnold had been building and building up to this giant salary that he's going to be making this offseason. That you kind of just were like, who is this guy? Like, we watched him in the Jets. He was terrible, and now all of a sudden he sits for a year behind Brock Purdy, comes into Minnesota, and this dude's a Pro Bowler, like a MVP candidate. Like who like it was just a wild storyline to see out coming out of Minnesota. Obviously, they got Justin Jefferson, and then Jordan Addison at receiver. Um, but it just kind of came out of nowhere. Like other than somebody like Colin Coward, who's been a Sam Darnold nut rider basically since day one, no one really saw that coming, and I feel like Detroit kind of stole that from him. That first big time game that you kind of saw him in, he lost, and coming in, I thought he looked a little nervous. Obviously, he was getting hit a lot, so that that does account for some of it. But I think this game potentially costs him a tenure in Minnesota. Um, at the very least, I think it cost him about 10 million a year. I think realistically, coming into this offseason, he's going to be generating about that 30 to maybe low or high 30s pay range in terms of $30 million to maybe 38 million, kind of in that Baker Mayfield mold, and whether Minnesota is willing to dish that out or if they want to transition to JJ McCarthy, which um, is a tough one because JJ's been hurt a lot, and it's in his knees, which is a scary injury. Because anytime you bust your knee up in the NFL, that typically is a season-ending injury. Which Sam has been super healthy, so that's kind of the question they've got away. I probably would pivot and go more towards the JJ McCarthy, just so you're working with that rookie deal and hope for the best. And I could see somebody like the Raiders or maybe the Colts coming in and trying to bring Darnold in and solidify that roster. But I'm not convinced that if you take him out of Minnesota that he's going to be generating like that. I think their coaching staff and then obviously their offensive weapons have really helped him this year. That I think if Sam is feeling smart, that he will take a pay cut to stay in Minnesota if he wants to play as a meaningful starter. Um, but at the same time, these guys are in it to make money, and like I would totally respect him going and taking the most that he could get out of a team and rolling the dice and seeing if he goes down as that 1 year wonder, kind of like a Case Keenum, where he had that one magical year, and after that he was essentially a backup. Um, but yeah, it just never really. It felt like Minnesota was just fighting a juggernaut in terms of a team that was willing to lay it all out there for their city, and it really just like it never even crossed their mind that they were going to lose. Um, and then you got Sean McVay, who obviously is one of the best head coaches in the world, especially uh, in the NFC. That I think you just saw a coaching mismatch. Obviously, Kevin O'Connell's had an amazing season. Should be in the running for Coach of the Year for what he did. Um, but I think it just showed you that there's levels similar to like when McVay played Belichick in the Super Bowl a couple years ago, where you just see the coaching disparity between the two guys, and it's close. But when you're at the playoff level, it does show up at the end of the day. So, congrats to the Los Angeles Rams. If you're a Minnesota fan, at least you made the dance. Welcome to my team. My team lost as well. It's heartbreaking, but you guys have a lot to build on. I kind of think that your defensive coordinator might be piecing out at the end of this year. I think that Brian Flores has earned another coaching spot after the whole Dolphins Tua debacle. I think that he's probably learned his lesson enough to at least get a coaching opportunity. But if he does end up coming back, then I think that the Minnesota Vikings are going to be a team to contend with for a while, especially if they go to JJ McCarthy and he can play. Otherwise, they'll be rolling back with Sam Darnold, and clearly he's good enough to get you to the playoffs. And this was his first meaningful playoff game. He's never been that. He was at the terrible Jets where you know they were never even sniffing the playoffs, let alone where they were in contention to, everybody thought that Minnesota could win this game and go get a rematch with Detroit, which didn't happen. But I mean, he'll learn from this and hopefully come back better than ever. But for now, it's the Rams' time to shine, and I think they're a sneaky dark horse for the Super Bowl this year. And then the other major news coming out of the NFL this week was Mike McCarthy and the Dallas Cowboys have agreed to part ways. This has been talked about for the last several years. That I wasn't really surprised that it happened. I was a little surprised at how it happened. I thought it was kind of a dick move by Jerry Jones to hold him for that extra week so he couldn't interview for like the Patriots gig, which obviously Vrabel just officially got hired for. And then he's late to the party coming with all these other coaching staffs. I thought it was dumb as well because as the Cowboys now have no opportunity to even try to get Vrabel, and then they're late to the party with all those other top guys like Ben Johnson or the DC for the Lions or whoever else they're looking at. I know I've heard that Deion Sanders has been called by Jerry about the job. I personally don't see that happening at all. I think that Deion has been very vocal about his purpose being to train young men to be just better people and better men, and I don't see that as the main area of focus once you're in the NFL trying to make that as a business. That I think he will benefit more from staying at the college level, especially with the amount of control he wants in terms of like teaching these guys to go to school and just be productive members of society. I mean, there was a whole clip about how he's going to dock their NIL checks if they're getting Fs and Ds. So I personally hope that he'll stay in college. I think it's a better route for him, but at the same time, he's prime time that he's a famous Cowboy, and I think Jerry would love that. It's a big splashy hire by him. But I personally don't think the Cowboys is a very good job. You're tied to Dak with a huge contract as well as CD Lamb, so that's a large chunk of your cap right off the bat, and then you're probably going to have to at least think about trading Micah Parsons, which is a tough pill to swallow when you draft him. And that's because you put all your eggs in the wrong basket, in my opinion, with Dak Prescott. Obviously got hurt again, which is unfortunate, but I think he's going to put you in the same bubble as like paying Tua, where your roster is just going to get worse and worse because you're putting more and more money towards Dak, which props to him for making that money and all that. But in terms of the team side, he's not going to elevate your team. That I don't think this is a particularly great job, especially with the working relationship with Jerry Jones, which is notoriously not a super enjoyable experience for the coach, in terms of you're going to have to constantly answer questions about what Jerry said in his like weird little press conferences he does after the games, or says on media radio hosts and stuff like that you're going to have no control over the roster. You salary cap is tied up in a couple of B to B minus players, other than CD Lamb, who's obviously an A, but he's a receiver, which is a reliant position. So it's tough to look at that as a top job. I'd like outside of that, I would almost rather go to the Bears, or I mean, even in the Saints, you're just coming into a better situation. Like the Saints, objectively, is not as high profile of the job, but the ownership is stable, and then you're gonna have complete control. You're coming into an established GM who's willing to work with people in terms of like Sean Payton, and listen to you, and you're not gonna be under the bright lights as much. That I think that the Cowboys job is going to be a tough one. I think I'm not really sure what they're going to do. I think they're going to try to go for a big splashy big name hire. I think I've heard Sarkisian from Texas, or Sark, is tied to him, which I wouldn't be surprised if they went that route. But I kind of think he would stay at Texas too. So I'm not really sure who they're going to get. I think uh I think they're really going to make a push at Dion, but I just don't see that one happening. And then the next big news is the coming out of the UFC, which is we have a huge pay-per-view coming up, which is just an absolutely stacked card. It's Arman Sarukian versus Islam Makhachev as the main event. It's out in LA as well right now, so we'll see if that changes at all. But this is a rematch from a couple years ago, but I personally thought that Islam lost the first fight. I think it was close. It was Arman's first fight in the UFC, and Islam's a tough order coming from that lineage of the Khabib uh, camp, and I think he's got a shot. I think wrestling wise, they can balance each other out. I think that Islam is probably the more technical striker, but Arman's got that pop, and obviously he's the one chasing. Islam's been up there a while, and he's had a couple of not as dominant performances in terms of like the Dustin Poirier fight. I didn't think he looked great in the first Volkanovski fight as well. I thought he won, but I thought it was a closer fight than it should have been, even though Volkanovski's a beast, but he's coming up in weight. That I personally hope that Arman wins. I'm not huge on a lot of these Dagestani fighters. I think obviously their fighting style is very grappling heavy, but it's not a lot of submissions. Which, to be fair, Islam does go for submissions more than others, but it's just not a overly fun style. They all have Ramadan, so a large portion of the year they just can't fight because they're fasting for Ramadan that I personally would like a little bit of a shakeup with Armand coming in and taking that, but it's a tall order against Islam. And then you got Umar Nurmagomedov, who is the cousin of Khabib Nurmagomedov. So he's fighting Merab Dvalishvili, who's a Georgian fighter that is currently the champ. And I didn't love the way they got this fight either. I thought this was the same way that Islam kind of got his title shot, where they are banking on that whole Habib lineage. Obviously, Umar is a beast, but he really hasn't fought anybody in terms of putting him in that title contention. He's got one top 10 win as far as I'm aware, which is Corey Sandhagen. So they kind of just leapfrogged him up to the front of the line because of his last name, and he won a close fight against Corey. But I would have liked to see him have to fight one more time, but they were kind of rushing him to get there because they want Merab beat, because Merab is similar to like Bilal Muhammad, where he's just a high volume, low power striker with just ridiculous cardio and pretty good wrestling. So he's not really a fan favorite at all. His big shtick is that he's pretty funny on the like TikTok or YouTube, where he does these skits making fun of his opponents and just being a goofy guy. So that's kind of his market lane that he's found, similar to how like Colby Covington is just a notorious dick and talks a lot of wild shit. Um, that's basically the same thing that Marab's doing, only he's kind of like the goofy skit guy for MMA. So, and then you got Yuri Prohashka versus Jamal Hill, which is the battle of the former champs. Obviously, at UFC, I believe 300, Jamal Hill got flatlined by Alex Pereira, and then in Yuri Prohashka's last fight, he got head kicked and got his ass beat by Alex Pereira as well. That we're kind of at a crossroads for these two fighters, because if one of you loses this fight, you're not really able to be in that title contention again, because you've lost and then you've lost again, and we've seen it. Like if Jamal wins, then that'll be the rematch. But Yuri, we've seen twice, and he's lost both. He's got knocked out both times. First one was kind of controversial, but the last one he got flatlined and his ass beat. That it's kind of a fork in the road for these two gentlemen in terms of title contention versus just really good fighter, like borderline gatekeeper, or you're gonna have to rattle off 5-6 wins to kind of get the hum behind your name again, even though that's a pretty lightweight class in terms of top contenders right now. um so those are kind of the big major fights that are coming up, which I'm super excited about. We had kind of a crappy pay-per-view this or fight night this last weekend, where Mackenzie Dern won in the main event in an armbar, and then there was a controversial knockout with Chris Curtis. But nothing really to write home about in terms of for casuals. It's only if you're a kind of a degenerate UFC fan that you would have probably watched that, or if you're just swiping through ESPN and need something free to watch, then you might have watched those. But yeah, so that's kind of the recap from the end of Wild Card Weekend. Again, I know this we didn't focus in this video, but I mourn my Broncos. We will be back. Super Bowl's got our name on it next year, or at least the playoffs, and we're gonna beat the Chiefs. But congrats to the Rams who put a whipping on the Vikings to end Wild Card Weekend, and we're looking forward to the next round of playoffs. So thank you for watching. This has been Jack Paisley and the Sports Casual.